Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. As I mentioned in prior videos, a little more scarce on making videos lately because less gear related or not gear related at all. And so I wanted to take you guys through the opportunity to explain how I took some sports portraits for our hockey team. And it was my first time ever doing it, and how I kind of learned, because what I'm hoping is that if you're kind of wondering how to take sports portraits and you are like, I have no clue what I'm doing, but you want to start this, I'll tell you what I did. And I'm not saying I'm the best. I'm not saying I'm a pro. Don't take it that way whatsoever, but more so like you can get these types of results with just a few things. So let me show you a few of the pictures of the kids that I took pictures of, and I'll show you how I kind of did all these different things. So here's some pictures right now. Okay, so those pictures were taken just a few weeks ago. Actually, I have two sets of pictures. One was on a Fuji film and the second set was on a Lumix. You couldn't tell the difference, so let's just pause right there. It doesn't matter what you have. You could be shooting a old Canon DSLR or whatever. It doesn't matter, because really depth of field doesn't matter here. You want to be a little bit deeper. What does matter is, more importantly, lighting. So I want to go through the things that I used first of all to shoot those photos. And we'll start with the camera. The first set, which I'm not delineating because you guys couldn't tell anyways, but the first set was shot on a Fuji X-S20 with the 33mm 1.4, so a 50mm equivalent lens. And the second set was shot on a Lumix S5II, which I'm recording you on right now, with the 51.8 lens that comes basically free now with the camera. I think it's 50 bucks, or it might even be free now. That doesn't matter. What matters is more of the settings. So let's go through a couple camera settings first of all, on how I had set the camera up, and then a few of the lighting things that I chose. First of all, camera settings. So I used a 50mm lens. I would argue you can use the standard kit zoom lens with it or whatever, and the reason being is because the depth of field you're shooting at, I shot these mostly at like f4, f5.6. You don't need to have shallow depth of field here. In fact, you don't want to, because if you're at f1.8 and the eye is in focus, but speaking of focus, am I focused? Okay. If you're at f1.8 and the eye is in focus because the camera picked the eyes up, but the rest of the image is not, let's say I had the gloves and they're like this, well, the stuff in the background would be out of focus. Or maybe the ears would be out of focus. And parents don't like that. And it doesn't matter in particular in this case because the background is black. So I shot these, I chose a 50mm lens because I feel like that's a natural field of view. And I shot these mostly at f4, f.5.6 with a deeper depth of field. So that's how I shot them. From the angle I shot at, I didn't shoot down at them. I didn't want the player to feel, is this focusing? I don't know why I feel like it's not. Anyways, I didn't want the player to feel like they were small, right? It's an athlete here. So you want to shoot these, in my opinion anyways, at eye height or slightly below eye height, almost as if the picture is looking down at the camera just slightly. Not a lot, because it creates a lot of distortion or it looks unnatural, but I went at eye level and just slightly down. So it's a slight angle up at the player. Okay, so 51.8, I shot the shutter speed at, I wanted to be at 1/250th. And then honestly guys, I let the ISO do whatever I wanted. I set the ISO manually, but I set the exposure based on the lighting that I had, and I didn't really care about ISO too much. I wasn't at 12,800 or anything, but I definitely wasn't at ISO 100. I just don't think it matters, because when you have good lighting in these new cameras, the noise is really just minimal. I was on a crop sensor for one of them. I was on a full frame sensor for the other one. I could have been on micro four thirds. Hell, I could have shot this on a 1-inch, and I don't think it would have mattered, to be honest with you. And so I don't think you should worry much about ISO outside of, you just want to make sure the ISO gives you the right exposure. And I would lock that exposure, because when you go to editing, you don't want your camera being tricked by a bunch of stuff that's going on in the background. And as we'll talk about in a second, the fog can kind of play a game with the exposure a little bit. And so I think you want to make it easier for editing. So just set your shutter speed, set your aperture, and set your ISO, and get the right exposure and lock it off there. The other thing that I did do is I set the white balance. Now, because I was shooting with this light, this key light here I have, or I was shooting with some flashes and some other instances, those are all at 5,500. They are, I don't know what you call them, daylight balanced bulbs, maybe is the right word, but they're all the same light. So I shot with a set white balance at 5500. And I let that sit there. And the reason why that matters as well is because if you have players coming in and out, right, maybe you have some players that are more darker complected or have darker hair or whatever, or maybe the camera picks up the jersey, which was dark and some blue, or I start spraying the fog and the white balance will be all over the place to compensate. You don't want to have to go through editing and screw yourself up for that. Make life easy on yourself, set the white balance, and in this case, with the flash or the key light that I had here, this off-camera light, I set it at 5500 Kelvin, and that worked great. So I set all that and I locked it in, and I just left it. And that made the editing process basically wash, rinse, and repeat. You could just copy paste to all the photos at the end, and it made the editing time go really, really, really fast. The second thing was I shot on AFS. I didn't want the camera trying to guess for autofocus all the time. With Fuji, it can be a little sketchy sometimes, get false confirmations. We start spraying kind of the fog or the mist a little bit. It can kind of confuse some of the autofocusing systems. So I put it on AFS and I would use face and eye detection. It would lock on the eye. I would set it and the kids were standing still. They weren't doing a lot of this or back and forth. They were just hanging out. And so that focus was good. And because I was shooting at f4 or f5.6, the depth of field was good enough such that if they moved just a little bit, that little bit wouldn't throw off the sharpness of the image. And so that's how I set up my camera settings. And I would argue get that down first because the second part here is more important, but that first part makes it really easy for you to edit. So the second piece. Now I can't show you guys because I'm using it to shoot this video, but I have a little softbox light. I don't even know what this thing is. I bought it a long time ago on clearance at some Photoshop, but basically it's a light that has four ports to put the light bulbs in. I only use 2 of them because 4 is just way too much. So right now I'm only using 2 bulbs. And it has a little cover over it to kind of just diffuse the light. I had that set up like I do now at a 45. Now there's other light in my house right now that's kind of offsetting, but you still see that there's a brighter light on this side of the face and there's shadow on this side of the face. If you go back and look at some of those pictures, you'll see clearly that there's shadowing going on, and that was on purpose. I had all the lights off in the room and just this key light, and it just adds a bit more drama. I think it's one of those subliminal things where if I had this light coming from everywhere and the face was washed out, I don't think that looks as good. So I wanted to create some of that shadowing, especially as they turn and you have the jersey and the name and the sticks and stuff like that. I think that looks a lot better. So the first step is have either a flash with a diffuser. I don't think you want the harsh flash. I'll go with, that is a look you could choose to use, or a constant light like I was using, off at a 45 up on an angle. In this case, it's like this. So it's 45 degrees off like this. I like the constant light better because it is easier to kind of set your exposure. With that, I'll talk about exposure real quick. This could be user error. On the Fuji, I was able to see exposure adjustments with flash, and the camera did a really good job figuring it out. When you shoot flash on the Lumix, you don't get exposure preview. So I had to kind of set my exposure, then put my flash on, and then set the flash settings. And we'll talk about flash because that is the next piece. I shot with a manual flash. Now, I just use these cheap little TT350 flashes. Is this thing focusing? TT350 flashes that are super cheap. They're not super powerful, and because I was indoors, I didn't need some super bright flash. I had 2 of these, but I only used 1 of them. And this one obviously is a TT350F. The F stands for Fuji, and so it works and talks and communicates really, really well with Fuji. But I also use these with the Lumix. I'll tell you why and how in just a second. But what I did with this is I took this flash is, I don't know, it was like 50 bucks or something. And I bought this little thing for like 10 bucks. I don't know what it is. This guy right here. So this diffuses it. And if you look through here, there's gels. See how there's blue in there? I have other colors too, like red, orange, green, maybe yellow. But I put the blue little gel or plastic piece in there. I put the flash in it just like this. And I had it set directly behind the athlete. So it was directly behind them. And I had it set to go trigger off of this right here. This is this is the Flashpoint one, if you guys can see this. But basically it's a Godox X Pro. This one's called the Flashpoint R2 Pro or whatever here. And so I had this on top of my camera and I was shooting with manual flash. And I like that because I could just go on top of the camera and I could increase or decrease the intensity of the flash. And basically every time I took a picture, this thing would flash directly behind the athlete so that you couldn't see it. Now, normally that would basically just create a light hair light, a lower level hair light if it's just behind you. But this is where the fog machine came in to play. So I purchased this little dude, this guy right here, this fog machine. It came with the fluid and everything off of Amazon for like 40 or 50 bucks. Came same day, delivered to my door. And I think really what it's meant for is like parties and Halloween decorations and that kind of stuff. If you look here, it's got LED lights on it. I didn't use these, but you just put some of the fluid in the top here, you plug it in, and then they have a remote you can use if you're by yourself, or a plug-in like wired remote. I had one of the hockey parents grab this remote, and I would tell them just before I shot, I would have them kind of lay a layer of fog behind the player, but in front of the flash, and that's critical. If it's in front of the player, obviously you've got fog in front of the player, and it takes away from the image. If you put it behind the flash, well, you don't get the same effect. And so what the fog does behind the player, but in front of the flash, that's behind them, the light will bounce off all of the flash. That's how you get that kind of like blue, smoky, hazy look. And so that's what I did. So essentially I had the camera, I had this 45-degree constant light right here. I had a flash on a trigger behind my athlete, and that flash had a blue gel in it with a diffuser. And then I had this fog machine, and I'd have someone lay down a layer of fog right before I flash. It would shoot, and obviously the more fog, the more blue haze you got, and then it would dissipate over time and kind of go away. And so that's kind of how I set that up. Now the last piece is kind of critical, and I'm gonna show you guys something here if I remember to do it in post. The last thing was behind them, I had a big black blanket that I just hung onto the wall. So we were in a gym, they had TRX machines or TRX ropes bolted to the walls. And I just took those down, and I took clamps and I hung the black cloth behind them. The reason why that's important is because when you have that constant light, right, and you got the flash, you got the smoke, it's gonna light up what's behind you. And so when you go to editing, you have all this crap behind you. I really just wanted a black background. Now when I did the first set of photos with the Fuji, I had the blanket. Something happened, my blanket didn't make it home that day. And the second set of photos I shot for the other team, I didn't have the blanket. And so I had to go get really creative and use the artificial intelligence subject detection inside of Lightroom to kind of create the same effect. I'll show you what that looks like here as I'm talking. I'll try to overlay kind of what it looks like if I can remember that. Basically, I found a gray like blanket. I put it behind my subject, but it was small. And so I saw all the brick walls and the machines and all that stuff in the photo, but I couldn't crop those out because the image was big enough such that it was in front of those things. And so Lightroom has this auto subject detection for background and foreground, and I basically just use that to create a artificially black background so you get the same effect. Now it sounds like this might be kind of complicated, but not really. Again, your camera with any lens, really any lens, I think is fine. You can use the kit lens, it totally works. Set your white balance, set your ISO, set your shutter speed, set your aperture. Your aperture needs to be deep enough to have a good depth of field, and just set it. Make your editing process easy. One light off of a 45-degree angle. I prefer a constant light, but you can make this a flash behind your subject with a gel. So if you wanted that to be orange, you could do orange or red, but I chose blue because that's our team colors, right? And obviously that's triggered by a wireless trigger. And then I had the fog machine with a black background, a blanket behind me. I think if I keep doing this, I'm gonna buy a legit professional background that like unrolls and they can step on. It'll make everything way easier, but you can improvise there. So it's really not that much gear. The light stand and the flash and the trigger, whatever, those are all fairly cheap. And I think you can do all this for a couple $100. And you can get in the business of taking sports portraits for these hockey teams or football teams or whatever and get as creative as you want. And it's not that difficult. So if you guys have any questions about any other settings, let me know in the comment section below. As I get away from doing more gear reviews, I want to show you how I do things and how maybe you guys can learn to do some stuff as well. I had never done this before. I watched a couple YouTube videos, kind of figured it out, purchased a few things that I needed, and I'll be honest with you, everybody was thrilled with them. And because I'm a coach at that hockey rink, I did my teams for free, and I did the other team that I did for free. They gave me a little gift, but I didn't charge them. I'm not Maybe if I get further with this, I'll charge people money, but I'm really just trying to help the teams out. Because candidly, the sports photographers that we've had out for our teams before, they're not very good. They do a lot of like overly fake CGI stuff where they're like in an old hockey barn, but it looks terrible in my opinion. And I just thought I could do a better job, and I could do it for free and quicker and sooner and help the teams out. And so, so far everyone loves them. Anyways, guys, that's how we did it. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.